like to introduce you to Renée Tillotson, founder and director of Still and Moving Center. To introduce us to today's topic of the Kwan Yin Pledge. And I'd like to just read the first quote to introduce Renée. Never will I seek nor receive private, individual salvation. Never will I enter final peace alone. But forever and everywhere shall I live and strive for the emancipation of every creature throughout the world. Kwan Yin. And I think this quote really kind of summarizes our guest speaker for today and the founder of Still and Moving Center. Renée?
Yeah, the Kwan Yin Pledge is really something that I do hold so dear to my heart as this very, very distant goal in the future to aspire toward. It would be like the ultra super marathon of lifetimes with the marathon that you're working on right now, David. So this idea of Kwan Yin is one that holds that there are beings in this universe who devote themselves entirely to living for the benefit of others. And this is not a unique idea by any stretch of the imagination. It isn't held by simply those who know about Kwan Yin. When I was considering the topic, I was just thinking of kind of parallel figures in the world's traditions. It came to mind to think of Prometheus, who knew well in advance, before he stole fire, which was the fire of mind, for mankind, whose minds were not as yet lit up. He knew, because his name means foresight, that he was going to be severely punished, and that punishment would go on and on and on for ages. And yet he did it, just purely out of the love of humanity. And in Plato's allegory of the cave, we have the idea of all these people chained at the back of a cave, and they're completely mesmerized by the shadow puppets, the shadows of the puppets, actually, that are flickering on the wall in front of them, and they think that's what's reality, until one of them finally manages to break themselves out of their chains and finally gets out of the cave, up into the light, which completely blinds them for a while until they get used to being in this wonderful world of lights and colors and all these marvelous things. And then they go back down into that dark, dank cave to help unchain those who are still locked there. And by the way, they're completely met with ridicule once they get down there. What do you mean there's something called light? What do you mean that this is an illusion, what we're watching on the walls? So it's kind of it's a real act of love when they go back down into that cave. And certainly when we hear the story of Christ, and absolutely he knew what he was in for when he insisted that he was going to teach his people no matter what. And it was no surprise to him that he suffered what he did on the cross, or that he suffered being denied by his own disciples. That he also predicted that, and that kind of pain he still willingly took on. So these are the kinds of ideas, of instances of self-sacrificing human beings who really live from this extremely noble ideal of living for the sake of others. I'd like to give you the context in which we are presented with the idea of the Kwan Yin pledge. This is a topic that is highly associated with Buddhism. Kwan Yin, however, is considered the goddess of mercy and compassion in many different Asian cultures, and I believe in different faiths, there's still this recognition and appreciation for Kwan Yin, not just the Buddhist faith. Within the Buddhist context, this is the worldview that we get the idea of Kwan Yin from. We have the worldview that the entire universe is breathed into being, and all of these creatures of the universe eventually emerge. And all of these creatures are on this vast evolutionary journey. And their evolutionary journey takes them through all these different stages of development. So you have creatures that we don't even consider to be alive. We don't consider them to be even plant or animal, or even bacteria. I mean, we're talking about right down to the particles of stone being part of this evolutionary journey. And at the apex of this evolutionary journey would be something that would be called enlightenment or nirvana, the attainment of bliss. And it is the idea of being completely reconnected with the one. So there's a breathing into the world of all that is manifest, all the many things, and then an in-breathing, and that in-breathing brings the universe back into an unmanifest state where everything is one again. And then it goes out and it's the multitude. So this state of enlightenment is evidently something like just being reunited with the oneness, the feeling of no separation whatsoever. And so in many senses, that is something that all of us could aim toward. Another concept that we get when we're talking about this manifestation of the universe and beings living in a manifest universe is the topic that we took up last week of ceaseless change. And whenever we have this ceaseless change, there's not just a coming into the world, there's a going through the world and all the accompanying toils and stresses and sometimes terrors. Certainly there's the sickness, the old age, and death that is accompanied with life in a body. And so from a Buddhist perspective, there's a lot of suffering. Yes, of course, there's so much joy. And this is what the Dalai Lama, also from the Buddhist line, stresses. I think for the sake of the modern world, we don't really like to think about this suffering so much. And so the Dalai Lama tends to talk about everyone in the world wants happiness. And that's a constant. And that's true. Everyone does want happiness. The other side of it is every single being has to experience suffering. And until we are reabsorbed in some way back into the oneness of non-manifestation, we are going to continue to go through suffering. So this Kwan Yin pledge reminds me a little bit of, and I'm sure it's supposed to, of, I'll just give you the briefest outline of a Jataka tale. And the Jataka tales are stories, allegories from what are supposed to be the Buddha's previous incarnations, whether in human body or before that in different animal bodies. And it's about a little bird, and there's a vast forest fire. And the little bird's heart is breaking to see all of the animals who are caught on the ground being engulfed in flames. But he can still fly. So he finds a stream, and he keeps dipping his wings into the stream and going and fluttering on over the fire with his little drops of water. That would be something that someone who had taken the Kwan Yin pledge would do. Someone who had completely devoted their lives to the service of others. No matter how absolutely impossible it seemed to be able to to really solve the problem, that would not stop them from making the effort. So this Kwan Yin pledge that is made isn't something evidently that can be made easily or even in a single lifetime, because the framework that we're talking about, this great evolutionary progression, is lifetime after lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. And so even this allegory would say, even pre-human, this life energy that was eventually to become the Buddha already had this predisposition, that was already making these efforts to be of service to others. And when we get to the human phase and somebody is able to even contemplate making a vow, making a pledge like that, the person is doing it with full knowledge of, or, well, let's say, they have a great deal of knowledge of what they're taking on. I guess as one would become more and more progressed, one would have even more understanding of the sacrifice that one would be making through such a commitment, and more willing to make that kind of a pledge, that kind of a vow. Interestingly enough, such a being evidently, like if you talk about these contrasts that are called in the language of Sanskrit nirvana and samsara. Nirvana is that enlightened condition. Samsara is the unenlightened condition. As somebody becomes wiser and wiser, they can actually see that there's no difference. So that's a very interesting point. So that perhaps for them, one of these beings, like who would take the Kwan Yin pledge, is someone who has progressed so far that they could cross over into nirvana. They could gain perfect enlightenment. and they don't. They stop at the edge. They remain enough of an individual, shall we say, and they retain enough, individuation that they can remain behind and help everybody else along the way to catch up, everybody else to pass into that enlightened condition. When we think of somebody like the Dalai Lama, and I love to bring him up as an example, just having heard these enormous belly laughs that he has, and just how he could fill an entire stadium with joy by his laughter. It's not that he doesn't suffer. Can you imagine knowing what he knows about what has been done to his people in Tibet, what continues to be done to his people? Just the genocide that they have been subjected to. So of course he knows suffering. And yet, over and over again, we hear him do these belly laughs, we see these big smiles, and we hear all of these wonderful words of encouragement and hope along the way. So there's some way in which these people who would take something like the Kwan Yin pledge to say, I'm going to stay here, I'm going to stay here. It's not as if they've wrapped themselves, in this black garb of martyrdom. Because what good does that do to anybody else? They are still managing, it seems like, to shed all this light on the world. And so it's almost as if this enlightenment is just shining right through them, even though they don't step over to get that like grand vacation, shall we say, that permanent vacation. They stay behind to help us, and yet still that light is getting shed through them. I think maybe that I'll stop there in terms of introducing this idea of the Kwan Yin pledge, and just love to hear other people's thoughts, not just on the Kwan Yin pledge itself, on this idea of beings who live to be of service to others. And I do want to mention that we have someone here, Miku Lenentine, who has been leading Kwan Yin meditations at Still and Moving Center just about ever since COVID started. So I know that she's probably really deeply contemplated this being and this kind of pledge. So I do want to recognize that she's here as well.
Thank you, Renee. Let's see, Maurice.
Well, I just had a question which we could take up later maybe, but one approaches a vow like the Kwan Yin pledge. One, of course, might do it in being very idealistic, but then as reality sets in, the question is, does the vow take on a different meaning as you go through the process of the path and of suffering? That's my question. In other words, at the beginning, it may be under one state of consciousness, but then as you gain experience or awareness, does one either have to rethink the vow or the vow takes on different meanings?
Maybe there is no suffering from that state. And I think that's what you were saying, Renee, is at that point of samsara and nirvana. So maybe Christ didn't suffer. Maybe for Christ that was bliss.
Okay, I have the same question, I think, as Maurice. We all, the first time we read that, we're astonished, we're inspired. we wonder if, where are the people that can do that or have accomplished that ability, that state of action. But is it realistic to think that over a lifetime that we would come to a point where we wanted to take the pledge again because we have more sense of its seriousness? We see more of the possibilities for action. We know more about the difficulties to such a commitment. So, and we want to actually not use this as a crutch because we want to always have to approach it with sincerity. So I was just wondering, and maybe lots of people have a thought about this, is actually the Kwan Yin Pledge something that we can use as a marker that we can come back to from time to time, because our commitment has by our actions been stirred, and it means much for us to pause and give, in a sense, kind of take the pledge in some way that we determine again.
Thank you, Carolyn. I see Cliff has got his hand.
Yeah, maybe a little bit along these lines. When first encounters the Pledge of Kwan Yin, it just is so overwhelmingly breathtaking that one doesn't know what to do with it. But it's not really, it seems to me, an all or nothing kind of thing. It seems that one can be inspired by it, one could resonate to it, and not even in this lifetime say, take the vow, if one feels just so overwhelmed by it, but just the very joy of bathing in it to resonate with it is maybe enough. I mean, I love the story of the little bird, and what the little bird was doing to put out the fire, and that kind of mental posture, that kind of attitude. I was thinking that a lot of times we think of salvation or nirvana or enlightenment as an end, but with the Bodhisattva vow or the Pledge of Kwan Yin, those would not be ends, those would be means. Our end is to help alleviate the suffering of others, not to gain enlightenment. The only reason to gain enlightenment, the only reason to gain nirvana, the only reason to gain some kind of salvation is so that we can be a better service. So it's a lot of times when we think of pursuing some goal like enlightenment, we feel like we're facing toward it, we're moving toward it. But if one resonates to the Kwan Yin Pledge or the Bodhisattva vow, it's almost like one turns 180 degrees. Instead of pursuing something for one's own benefit, one is facing towards the suffering of humanity and focusing on that. And by changing that posture, that attitude, one wants to, even in one's own suffering, to bring more joy into the world, even if one, say, hasn't really got insight or enlightenment, one just feels the suffering of others and one wants to alleviate it to the best of one's humble ability.
Aloha, everybody. Nice to see everybody. I wanted to comment on Maurice's thought of a vow. My understanding of a vow is you don't change a vow. You've accepted a vow, you've pledged your life to a vow. You can't change that. It's not like even a contract, you can amend a contract and stuff. But my understanding of a vow is that is in stone, it's sacred, it's forever and ever. Not necessarily retaking, but renewing a vow. Because like those of us who are married, we took a vow to stay with our spouse through thick and thin, for rich or for poor, in sickness and in health. And then they do renew vows. And so that's what I was thinking of, renewal. Thank you.
I think for me, when I think of the Bodhisattva vow or living, it's kind of like you said, David, in the beginning. You did an NLP program where you envisioned what you want. And I think there's something about really living from love and compassion that you mentioned, about Renee, about service to others. And it may be something little that we do. It may be how we hold a cup. It may be the smile to a person in the grocery store. You know, I think we get the feeling that if I'm going to live love and light and faith and trust in my life and live from divine wisdom and divine oneness, that it has to be big. And I really think it's in the little things that if everyone does little things, we are all one. And so what we do to one, the littlest, we do to everyone. And I think that for me, it's like, how do we live in enlightenment now? How do we live that Bodhisattva vow now in everything that we do, so that we don't, do live love and compassion in the world now? And I think we get lost if it's not big and grand, it doesn't matter. But I really think it's everyone contributing in those little ways and being of service to others and living from that place of love and compassion that's going to make a difference in our world. That's it.
Very, very well said, Diana. Thank you. Thank you. I see Miku has her hand up also.
I'm really happy to be here. And I've been sitting with this pledge, like Renee said, as part of our Kwan Yin meditation every Tuesday at 4:30 on Zoom, if you want to join. I read the pledge at the beginning of every practice. And we've been sitting with this for weeks and months and years to reread it. And some of us here have been talking kind of about the magnitude of this. This is this pledge, to me, the first many times I read it, I just couldn't even understand it. It was like, I understand the beauty of it and kind of what some had mentioned here. But it's such a grand scale, I could not comprehend it with my mind. I read the words over and over and over. And at least it feels for me that this is actually a Bodhisattva pledge. Is that's something you take when you're there. That's kind of what it feels like, is like a human to take a human, right? A human, I think of her as a goddess. To take this pledge is like kind of impossible. But it's a pledge of seeking. But yeah, again, we're just reading again. How many times can we read it and just receive it, right? So, never will I seek nor receive private individual salvation. So just at the self level, I won't do anything just for me. I pledge that for the rest of my life. I won't seek just for my own enlightenment, just for my own happiness, just for my own well-being. It's already, so many of us are just trying to find just it for ourselves. Like if we could just find compassion just for ourselves, that's already huge, to take a vow just to return to harmony or balance of peace for ourselves. But her first line is, I won't do it just for me. So that's already the first thing that's in there. And then, never will I enter into this peace alone. I'll never go there alone. So even when I've attained it, never alone. And forever and everywhere shall I live. How do we, forever and everywhere? So this is like the magnanimous nature, the ability to be everywhere. And then I vow to be everywhere, live everywhere, in everywhere. To support them and offer them and invite them. I think of it as an infinite invitation when I guide it as a meditation, infinite, forever invitation. And for every creature throughout the world. So every time I've read it, it just like sinks deeper and deeper and deeper every time we practice. So yeah, I think even in just trying to understand the vow itself already has profound and transformational.
I really appreciate what you just said. It really resonates with me. And yet for me, if we, in my belief, we all are one. And so even the littlest thing that we do, it is for everybody. We can't say that if I have love and compassion for myself, for me, that that changes something in our universe and in our world, because we are all one. And if I get caught in my ego self and brain trying to understand this vow, I can't. It doesn't make any sense. But if I can listen with my heart and feel like I'm listening, for me, divine wisdom or divine guidance to say, what do I do next in this moment? That if I, in my ego mind, if I said I'm going to save all sentient beings, that is the ego mind. And I think it's moving beyond or within oneness that allows us to listen to the next step that we take. And so I believe whatever we do in the littlest form affects the frequency of everything, because we are all one.
One of Mother Teresa's sayings was, do little things with great love. So when Diana was talking about the smallest thing, it doesn't have to be grand, but when you do it with great love, it's such a treasure, and it's for the betterment of everyone.
I was just reading about a study done recently about random acts of kindness, and they were rating having the person who did the random act of kindness, rating the magnitude of which they thought their act of kindness had. And then on the receiving end, they asked people to rate the people who received these random acts of kindness, have them rate the impact that it had on them. And what a huge difference. People receive so much more from something like simply holding the door open for someone, or picking them a flower, or just a gentle touch on the shoulder when someone needs it. So yeah, just to sink in what Diana, Mary, and others have said. I am curious, since I don't see a hand raised, I would like to redirect back to Maurice, who kind of launched us down an interesting path. And so I would maybe ask Maurice, if it sounds like we're addressing the question that you raised.
Yes, I think we did address it a bit when we started to look at the idea that once one makes a vow, it's a vow or a promise. It's not a contract that can be broken. But the idea of renewing a vow or coming back to it if by chance you've gotten away from it, I think is a really important idea. And the other idea is that, of course, you're not making the vow for yourself. Actually, you're making it on behalf of all of humanity. Are you not?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We're talking about the Kwan Yin pledge. So while it is very awesome, you can take baby steps, which has been mentioned by many people in this discussion. And you can go back and reread the vow, as Miku does with her class. So it's really kind of, as was pointed out, a turning, like a 180-degree turning of the heart. And this is kind of the directionality, the thing that inspires you, that takes over lesser attractions, so to speak. So you become the vow. It's not separate from you.
Reminds me also of something from my Werner Erhard days, and he was talking about the distinction between sacrifice and commitment. And with commitment, there really is no sacrifice.
I just a comment and a question. So first, I really appreciated what Miku said, because it seems as though just to think about the content of the pledge is to think about the possibility of one taking such a pledge is to activate that which is, it's almost like activating the immortal soul in oneself. Because how could you commit to such a thing? Because first of all, we're currently in a state of unenlightenment. So we're not anywhere near entering final peace. And then secondly, to where is the end of all beings? Is there an end to all beings? There isn't. There is no end. So to make a commitment to serve all beings endlessly, what you're doing is you're taking the standpoint of the immortal within oneself. And you could say, this is sometimes put in terms of the Buddha family, and the Buddha nature. We all have the Buddha nature inherent within us. It's like lying asleep, waiting to be awakened. It's like the jewel that's buried beneath the hut of the pauper, right? He doesn't know it's there. There's this whole pot of gold there sitting, and he's in this little hut, in his loincloth. He doesn't know he's got this treasure. But it's like the slow awakening to the realization. That's what, when Miko was talking, that's what was I was coming to mind, this awakening that which is unconditional in us, that which is the Buddha nature in us, in the vow itself. And so that's just one observation. But the question I had was, often in the symbolism of Kwan Yin, like I think the one that's in the Still and Moving Center entryway there, she's riding on a fish, or is it a dragon? Sometimes she's shown as riding on like a giant carp, and other times on a dragon. And there's a very famous, enormous sculpture of her on a dragon in China. And there's many representations, of course, of her. But just wondering, what do folks think that symbolism indicates?
I'm not schooled enough to really know about that. I know she is intimately associated with both the carp, is a particular fish. What I was wondering about was what you think about the idea. I believe that my ideas about karma have been changed. And I wonder if anybody else has a similar experience from the idea of Kwan Yin. Karma in terms of cause and effect. And if you look at it, between lifetimes, different lifetimes, from the standpoint of reincarnation, I can really see this phenomenon that I want to talk about happening, or I can imagine it happening. But even maybe within a single lifetime, maybe this is true. And that is, sometimes when we see someone going through really hard times, we might think, I have found myself thinking, oh my gosh, I wonder what, they're needing to learn from this experience. Since I do see the universe as being for the education of the soul. So somebody going through a very difficult time, I think, oh, wow, they really must have something, a huge thing that they're needing to learn from this experience. And then when I pull in the idea of Kwan Yin and the Kwan Yin pledge, the Bodhisattvic path, then I'd go, oh my gosh, maybe not. Maybe this is, this highly evolved being who is deliberately putting themselves in this very difficult situation. Maybe to test themselves, or maybe they don't even need to be tested anymore. Maybe they're doing it to exemplify for others how to walk a difficult path. and to do so with graciousness or whatever, maybe they have stepped into someone else's place so that the other being doesn't have to go through such a terrible thing. And so it kind of busts open this tit for tat kind of idea of, you know, we sow what we reap, and that's it. You know, we deserve everything we get, which is also true, I know. But on the other hand, there's this idea that maybe there are these people, these beings who take these things on deliberately. And I've been looking at it the wrong way. So I'm just wondering about that.
I was wondering when you were going to admit that you were wrong, Renee. So. No, it's a great point. And you know, that's what, I think that's part of what got translated in the Christian tradition to, you know, the sacrifice that Christ made on behalf of humanity, right? So that was sort of the archetypal standpoint, which, yes, it's true of great beings that they do it consciously. They take birth consciously. They enter into the worst situation consciously. But we've forgotten that's who we are. And so you could say we're doing the same thing, but we're doing it unconsciously. It's one way to put it. Yeah. And yeah, but how to sort of pair that up with, you know, sort of the more retributive aspect of karma, where, you know, a person is suffering really because they have something to learn that they're refusing to learn. They don't want to learn, and errors that they've committed in the past. So yeah, it's a challenging perspective to kind of reconcile.
It does, for me, help, I think, keep me from getting a little judgmental or yeah. I had the strangest kind of little incident go through my mind today. I was driving along the road, and there was what looked like probably a coyote dead on the side of the road. And I thought, oh, I wonder who's going to come clean that up. Who would take that job? Oh, they must be one of those kind of hardened people who can just deal with dead animals and not worry. I mean, it doesn't bother them. And then I went, what if it's bodhisattvas who come and pick up those those dead creatures and bless them as they're doing it and see them on to their next step? So it was, you know, this little mind thing I had to do to correct, I think, a preconception about who is who and who does what.
We are helped that over the course of a lifetime, we're going to have to broaden our perspective. If we were to hear about this pledge when we're 21, we would probably be pretty focused on ourselves and what kind of ethical discipline we should develop. And it seems over the years that hopefully we are beginning to think much more like today, in today's world, globally. And maybe it's almost easier to think about the pledge when we have expanded enormously the field of our concern and had more experience with helping and all that. So I just wanted to make that point. But the other point, it occurred to me, and we don't have time to talk about this topic, certainly, that the Kwan Yin Pledge is related to the whole ideal and practice of nonviolence. One, and that's, you know, there's so many ways in which we may engage in, maybe we think are little ways, in some sort of violence. We upset someone's feelings, or, you know, we could go on and on. And then there are more serious cases. But it does seem that involved in this effort to move towards expression and practice of this pledge does have to work on, I think everybody would have to work on developing nonviolence, because it's hard to see how you could fulfill the pledge without conquering all those propensities towards violence that is in human nature. It's in the context of human life. So I just wanted to add that as part of the discipline of fulfilling this pledge.
Very nicely said, Carolyn. Renee, do you have any closing comments that you'd like to make?
Thank you. This is another bodhisattvic being who makes a pledge in a little bit different way, but it's certainly from the same heart space. For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then, may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world.
Renee, I think this is such an important subject, especially now with all that's going on in the world. And you are a bodhisattva. You exemplify living of giving, and we're all human. And yes, we're not perfect. We make that idea our desire every day to live with love and compassion. And I see that in you. And so you're bringing up even your vulnerability, and your thought about the animal on the side of the road are all just beautiful examples of how that self-introspection and self-understanding allows us to have greater compassion and love for everybody and understanding. So I want to thank you for this. It is a beautiful subject, and you did a beautiful job. Thank you.
Thank you.